We've been doing on Sunday evenings a lot of theology, and if you were to go take the college class, it's systematic theology, or if you went to Harding, because they don't use those words as much, it was great themes of the Bible for me. And we have gone through all kinds of different things about Christian life and church life and sin and salvation and Jesus and the Bible and God and all these different things we've looked at. And we have come, kind of as the way it was intended to go. The last one we were going to cover this year is eschatology, which is a word you probably never use, but it basically means end times, last things, a study of last things. Because it's December, it's the end of the year, it seemed like a good time to do it. And as the schedule has kind of fallen out, we had tonight, and then next week we're going to have a missions report from David about one of our mission, or maybe a couple of our mission works. The following week is Christmas Eve, which I was not thinking about when I planned all this way back when, and we will just be here in the morning, and then the following week is New Year's Eve, and we'll be here, but I have no clue what to expect. And so I thought it would be kind of weird to start that tonight, take 2 weeks off of it, and then maybe come back to it for a week or maybe not. So I like irony. We're going to have end times to begin 2024. So we're going to kind of carry this over into 2024, and in January talk about some of those things, heaven, hell, judgment, being ready, all that kind of stuff, and what that looks like, or at least our best guess at it, and what we can read in Scripture. And so I thought we'll come back to another character thing tonight, and I haven't quite decided New Year's Eve what we'll do yet, but we got a little time to think about that. So I was thinking resilience tonight. It seems to fit in a lot of ways. Unless you have a really, really modern version of Scripture, you will most likely not find the word resilience in there. You'd probably have to have the Message to get that in. But I think it's a very biblical idea that ties to a few different Bible words that we'll look at. And we're going to do it a little differently than we normally do. We're not going to spend quite as much time on the front end, and then we're going to jump into one story because it's longer, and then maybe make some ideas at the end about what this means for us. So resilience, according to Webster's, is this: the capability of a strained body to recover its size and shape after deformation caused especially by compressive stress. And we learn immediately that resilience is usually something that's used in talking about chemistry and biology and things like that, where you're working with materials and you try to make them do different things and see how they react. And what we have found kind of in our modern times is resilience tends to be something we talk about a lot when it comes to someone going through difficult times and learning to adapt and that kind of thing. And so there's kind of a divergence of the definitions we look at, but we'll tie them into Scripture things. Secondly, an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. Now, I know this is the Webster definition, and I'm supposed to agree because Webster knows more than I do, but I don't like easily here. Because when we have used the word resilience or seen the word resilient used, usually easy is not one of the first things that comes to mind, is it? Usually it's a major thing where you're trying to overcome something or adapt to something. A lot of books were written about the idea of resilience during the COVID pandemic and what it looks like to try to work through that as life has changed and the world around you is so different, and how do you come out of that on the other side a better person. So I don't agree with easily, but it is the ability to recover from or adjust. So there is what is supposed to happen, and then things change, and how do you adapt and how do you adjust to that? And when we've talked about things like this before, one of the examples that always comes to my mind, when we were in youth ministry, we took a group to Nebraska to do a VBS at a small church up there. And there were two sisters that were teaching games to the kids. Savannah and Lauren, two of our favorite people in the world. They were 1 year apart. Their dad was one of our youth deacons, real active family in the church. Savannah was just everything had to be lined out just so. Everything was well planned. Everything was, here's everything for each day in a little Ziploc bag with the day on it, that kind of thing. Lauren was a fly by the seat of your pants, whatever happens, happens, we'll adapt, we'll adjust, and everything will be fine. And so Savannah sets out this game exactly as it should be, and the kids were in a bit of a mood that day, and they came in kind of rough and rambunctious, and the next thing you know, everything has just gone haywire. And Savannah doesn't know what to do because it's not how she does things. And Lauren, who normally you kind of have to keep on task and keep her going in the right direction, she immediately just jumped in and was resilient. She's adapting, changing, everything is fine, everything is good. And so this is a strength for some of us, and this is a difficulty for some of us, and usually we marry one another. So anyhow, third, flexibility. So it is the idea that, again, there's a way that I want to do things, and when you run into something that's not that, you have to be flexible. From time to time, most of us encounter something where the way we would do it is not the way it's being done. And what do you do? And so flexibility, and then kind of in that plastic, everything else kind of range, elasticity, which is your ability to stretch, be different. On one of those trips, we took rubber bands with us. On one of those VBS trips, we put one on everybody's wrist. And if they were having trouble adapting, we would walk by and grab the end of that rubber band and pop it to remind them to be flexible. I'm sure nowadays you'd probably get arrested for that, but it was fun back then. All right. So, Christian resilience. And these scriptures don't mention the word resilience, but I think when we think of resilience in a Bible term, there's a piece of it that is steadfastness. There's a piece of it that's all kinds of different things. There's just a few ideas here. In Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. So resilience is part trust in God. If we trust in God, it makes it a little easier for us to adapt, to adjust, because we understand that God is working throughout whatever it is. Secondly, in James 1 verse 12, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. So we are trusting in God, and then we also have steadfastness. We are going to see it through, stick it out, regardless of where it goes and what's going to happen. We're going to be people of God who stand firm, and we're going to do and be a part of what God has in mind. In Joshua 1 and verse 9, Joshua is about to take over from Moses, and God is kind of giving him the pep talk. And he says to him, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So a piece of resilience is courage. There are going to be times where you're afraid. There are going to be times where you want to give up. There are going to be times where you look at whatever it is and you think there's not a good outcome here. But resilience says, I'm going to trust in God. I'm going to have courage that it's going to be good. In 2 Timothy verse 1 and verse 7, Paul writes, for God gave us a spirit of fear. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. And we could probably pick out all of the words of this, but I want us to center in on resilience is self-control. You have the capacity to do this. You may have convinced yourself you haven't. You may have had people around you who question you, but you have the capacity to adapt, to change, to be resilient. And then in chapter 1 and verse 2 of James, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. So trials are what give you the opportunity for resilience. And part of our need for resilience is made of joy. And so we're going to try to go into this with the best attitude we can. Sometimes much easier than other times. But we're going to do the best we can to try to get our attitude right to be resilient people. So a Bible example of resilience. And there are a lot of places we could go. I thought about Caleb and Joshua, the spies, as they go in and everyone around them is trying to push them another way. We could look at the life of Jesus, obviously. I think we look at several apostles who at the end of the life of Jesus find themselves running and hiding or denying. And then the book of Acts are just like these giants of the church. But I want us to look at Abigail. And we don't talk a lot about Abigail. Abigail is mentioned all throughout 1 Samuel 25. And then again in Chronicles when she has a child, and there's one other time in one of the other books in that realm. That's about it. We don't know a lot. But she's an interesting character. So Abigail, we'll introduce her starting in verse 1. And if you want to turn here in your Bibles, we'll camp here most of the time tonight. Samuel died, so we are between the times of the death of Samuel and the death of Saul. As David had been anointed by Samuel and trying to feel his way through all of what he's going to be, and also having to deal with Saul and everything that Saul is toward David and the jealousy and the fear and all of that. So Samuel's died. All of Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. Then David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. And so he's the kind of guy that the people around would probably look to and think, well, this guy's successful. He's made something out of himself. Look at him with all these sheep and everything that he's doing. He's the kind of guy you might want to emulate. But then we learn a little more about who he is, and he really is not the kind of guy you want to be. So the name of the man was Nabal, and we'll talk about his name later. And the name of his wife was Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. So you have this description of the two people within the relationship. Abigail is discerning and beautiful. So she is beautiful and she has a good head on her shoulders. She understands how the world works. She understands where she fits within that. She knows how to operate within different situations, how to handle people. She's discerning. And then she's beautiful on top of that. And then her husband, Nabal, is harsh and badly behaved. And then you have Calebite there, which I don't suggest us having insults, but if you were to look for a new insult, in Hebrew Old Testament times, Calebite, we're not talking so much about the connection to Caleb or anything like that. It basically was like calling somebody a dog. So he's a harsh and badly behaved dog out there. And you have, as we would think of it today, he has outkicked his coverage. He has no idea what he has in Abigail because he's so foolish and unaware. And at the same time, Abigail is having to deal with this. This would make a great sitcom nowadays, I guess, Abigail and Nabal and all of their adventures, but they're very different people within this relationship. And so as we continue the story, David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David is kind of aware of who this guy is and what he's doing. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him, peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel." So David is reminding Nabal, you've got these guys out here who are working, and we've tried to see to it that they're safe. We have not done anything to harm them. We've stayed out of their way, but at the same time, if someone had bad intentions, we've tried to do what we could to be protectors of them. And so our relationship to this point, even though you may not know me and we don't have a lot of conversations, we should be friends. We should be people who are getting along well. So ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and they waited. So they are sent with this friendly greeting to give. Peace, peace, and peace is what they're offering. And then they offer this all up, and then we see them waiting. And we've probably all been there at some point along the way where you mean well and you want to have a good relationship, and you are left just kind of hanging there of what's going to happen, what is this going to be? And they sit and they wait. And it says that Nabal answered David's servants in verse 10, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse?" Which, by the way, already kind of tips off he knows who David is because he's the son of Jesse. "There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat and that I've killed from my shearers and give it to men who come from I do not know where? Do I just give my stuff to just anybody?" And his greeting is basically a slap in the face. So David has come to him in peace, reminding of the relationship that they've had, even though it's not a close-knit one. It's one where David has looked out for him. And in response, he does not get what he's looking for. And I would imagine a lot of us have probably been here at some point too, where you mean well, you try to do the right thing, you try to offer peace to someone, you try to offer maybe a gift to someone, and in return you are met with exactly the opposite of what should happen. And so Nabal is so foolish, he doesn't even realize what it is that he's doing in this slap in the face. So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. And David said to his men, "Every man strap on his sword," and every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. So they are having all their swords strapped on. They're going out. They've got so many people, they don't even need to bring everybody with them, and they are ready for a fight. This is not how David set out, is it? David set out looking for peace, looking for friendship. Nabal slaps him across the face with his statement, and David said, "All right, you want to fight? We'll fight." And so he's ready for everything to change. But one of the young men told Abigail. And I think we learned something very subtle about Abigail that's not really listed out in the text here, which is one of the young men knew this was a good idea. They knew that we are in a heap of trouble with what we have just done. And there's going to be a bad reaction that comes to this. And honestly, if we go back and tell Nabal, nothing good's going to come of that either, because look what he's already done. And they realize, you know who is discerning here. You know who understands how things work and what needs to happen. It's Abigail. So let's go and talk to her. So one of them goes and tells Abigail, Nabal's wife, "Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the fields, as long as we went with them." And so you also learn, whatever David has done for them is so noticeable that these guys working in the fields have seen it. They realize that this is the kind of relationship we want to have. And so they describe it all to Abigail. "They were a wall to us by both day and night, or by both night and day, and while we were with them, keeping the sheep. Now, therefore, know this and consider what you should do. For harm is determined against our master and against all his house, and he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him." So they also understand how Nabal works. One cannot speak to him. And we have been there too, have we not? When you know what someone needs to hear, but you're thinking to yourself, do I need to waste the time saying this because it's not going to do anything? And sometimes we probably decide that unfairly, and we don't give the other person the opportunity to do the right thing. But they likely have had enough experience with Nabal that they realize we can tell him reasonable things, things even that are going to result in good for him, and he just doesn't listen. He has figured it all out already. And as much as I look at Nabal in this story and I think, what a mess this guy is, I realize I am occasionally Nabal. And there have been times in life where I was probably more Nabal than Abigail. There was a lot of, I'm not listening to anybody who means me well. I have so much decided that I am correct and right in this that I'm just going to plow on and hope for the best, or know that the best is coming, not realizing I've got a group putting their swords on, getting ready on the other side. And so they don't see it. So they go to Abigail and they warn her about all that's going to happen. So Abigail made haste. Abigail realizes, okay, this is an interesting too, isn't it? That David's men show up with Nabal, and what happens? They wait. They have to wait for Nabal to come out and slap them across the face with his statement, and Abigail makes haste. She realizes, okay, time is of the essence here. So she made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine of 5 sheep already prepared, and 5 seahs of parched grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on donkeys. Now, good night, where did all of this come from? We almost ran out of pizza Wednesday night with Wednesday Night for the Master, and it was not a real big group of us, but she's got all of this stuff ready to go. And so she lays it on donkeys. And she said to her young men, "Go on before me, behold, I come after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode the donkey and came down under the cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came toward her, and she met them. And David and his men, as they're coming toward her, remember what they're going to do. I mean, they've got swords on, they're ready for battle, they're ready to go, and then they encounter this caravan of gifts with this beautiful woman in the midst of it. And they think, what is this all about? So David said, "Surely in vain I have guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned evil for good." He's still kind of stewing. He's not happy about what he's gotten from Nabal. "God, do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him." And we don't think a lot in these terms. Maybe we do think more in these terms than we want to admit, but we don't make a lot of these oaths like this nowadays. But when people in Bible times said these things, there weren't a lot of options for undoing them. This was kind of this has been said with people to hear it, and now this is what's going to have to happen. And we could have made this about the resilience of David, by how we're going to see this turn out here in a minute. But I think Abigail is probably the driving force behind it all. So when Abigail saw David, in verse 23, She hurried and got down from her donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. And you have the contrast. The one who, look at how important I am, and who are you, David, son of Jesse, and why should I give you anything? And then Abigail, who could have easily just turned and ran, but instead goes and bows before him on the ground. She fell at his feet and said, on me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. So she reminds who she is, who he is, what the relationship is at this point, and why you should listen. Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. So there's a little play on words here that we don't understand because of Hebrew. This name Nabal literally means fool. And so most commentators seem to think it's unlikely that Mama Nabal, way back when, thought, I'm going to name my son Fool. And so probably what has happened here is as the story has been told, just to really put emphasis on it, we're just going to start referring to him as Nabal. This is who he is. And he is so foolish, he's just kind of known by it. So he says, now then, as my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained from you blood guilt, and from saving with your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. So not only am I going to give you above and beyond what you were asking for in the first place, ironically enough, from the wealth of Nabal, but more than that, let me give you this blessing, that you will be victorious, that your God will do what he says he will do, and that you will see his power at work and understand you don't have to do what you're thinking about doing. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living care of the Lord your God, and the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. And so basically she says, David, remember whose you are. You belong to God, and you don't need to do what you're about to do. God will take care of it. And then once you have figured all of that out, remember me in the end of all of this. And remember that I treated you with the kindness that you were looking for. And so Abigail is able to just change everything. Everything that was heading in one direction, she's able to bring it to a stop because of her discerning nature and her resilience. And she's able to take a bad situation and through flexibility and resilience and all of those things, make it something that is better. So David said to Abigail in verse 32, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. What was about to be really bad that was going to happen, blessed be God for sending you to change that. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male. Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, go up in peace to your house. See that I have obeyed your voice and granted your petition. So the peace, and peace that David offers at the very beginning of this is now exactly what he's going to give because of what Abigail has done. But the story doesn't end there. It says Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house. When I was a kid, I used to hear stories about this all the time. There was a hurricane that hit Mobile when I was a kid living there. And everybody would talk about Hurricane Camille that had hit Biloxi, Mississippi about 10 years earlier. And during Hurricane Camille, there were a lot of people, because there had never been a hurricane quite like that one, that thought, we will just ride this out. It'll be fine. It won't be that bad. We've had hurricanes before. We've lived through them. And they had hurricane parties. And lots of people would get together and they would drink and they would dance and they would have meals together, and they were partying to welcome Hurricane Camille as the house collapsed around them, because it was much worse than anything they experienced before. And when I read about Nabal, I think of that. Just the world around us, how much of that kind of things happens, where the world around us celebrates everything that is ungodly, not knowing the disaster that comes with that. And Nabal is the same. He was holding a feast in his house like the feast of the king, and Nabal's heart was very merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. And we also learn in the midst of all this, you lose your senses and bad decisions are made. And so Nabal just falls into that as well. He has no awareness of what's going on around him. And again, with Nabal and his wife, you see the opposite. Nabal is completely unaware. She is aware, discerning, working, getting things done. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things. Do you have any idea you were about to die as you were partying? I mean, they were coming down the hill to get you, and I put a stop to it. And his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult that I received at the hand of Nabal and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil on Nabal on his own head. Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, David has sent us to take you to him as his wife. And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. Her resilience, Abigail's resilience, brought about a complete change in her life. Her ability to adjust to what was going on, to find a better way, changed everything in her life. And she goes from being married to the fool to being married to the man after God's own heart, and to being a part of the royal family in her future. Everything changes because of her resilience. So, what does resilience look like for us? And when I thought of this question, I went a lot of different places in my mind. And like I mentioned earlier, COVID was one of the places I went as we went through this big change around us, and we were forced into flexibility. Whether you wanted to or not, there were things in your life that had to change. Whether you thought masks were a good idea or not, and let's not get in that debate again, but whether you thought they were good or not, you went places where you could not go inside if you didn't have it. And forever in hospitals and places like that, you could not go inside if you didn't. You had to adjust. You probably never thought there would be a day where you did those things, and there you were. For some of you, your jobs went from being in a place to being in your dining room, and you had to adapt and change and all of those things. So resilience for us, it's this flexibility as things around us begin to change. And I shared with you during COVID in a bulletin, and I don't think I have since then. If I have, I apologize. But some thoughts from the book Faith for Exiles. And Faith for Exiles was written during that time, talking about what is it like to be a Christian in our world today. And they broke exiles or Christians down into these 4 groups that they found as they did lots of research and surveys. The first group was prodigals. And we know that word pretty well, which is basically ex-Christians. These are people who were at one time churchgoers, Christians, believers, and they have, for whatever reason, decided they didn't want to do that anymore, and they are no longer, if you were to ask them if they were a Christian, they would say, well, I was at one time, not anymore. And then you have the nomads, which are people that they are, if you ask them what they were, they would tell you they're a Christian, but they're not attached anywhere. And so they are kind of going through life without church, but feeling like there is some kind of relationship with God there. The third group is habitual churchgoers. So these are people that, why are you at church? Well, that's what I do. Is there anything beyond that in your life that looks different? No, but I go and I'm there, and that's kind of how this works. And then the fourth group they described as resilient disciples. And so as we think of resilience, this is who we want to be. And so we'll close by looking at what does it look like to be a resilient disciple. So first of all, resilient disciples have a close relationship with Jesus. And that is to say, when we think about how we want to live life, we look at the life of Jesus as our example. When we think of how we want to come into a situation, we're guided by prayer, we're guided by the principles that he lived by. We look at Jesus as a person we want to emulate. We have this relationship that goes beyond just someone who is words on a page. He is a real person to us in life. Secondly, resilient disciples consistently discern the good and the bad in the culture around us. So it's not that we're constantly condemning everyone around us because they do not live by the same standards we live by. But we can see this is right, this is wrong, this is godly, this is ungodly. And we look at everything in culture as, how would I as a Christian live this out? What would I embrace? What would I avoid? Third, resilient disciples have good intergenerational relationships. I love this about Southwest. I love that it was not a generation coming up this morning. It was all generations coming up this morning. I love that when I stand in the back after we're done, it's oldest to youngest. I love that before services this morning, I was having a conversation with Grayson back there about who is watching us on YouTube and Facebook right now and how many numbers there were. And I thought, how cool that he's even paying attention to this, and we talk. I love when somebody, I have all the drawings in my office. If you're a kid here and you have drawn something for me or drawn me, especially if you've made me look better than I really am, I have those all in my office, and I love that stuff. I love that times that hopefully we connect, and at all generations, we have these relationships. It's the strength of the church. Fourth, resilient disciples are disciples within the workplace and other parts of life. And this is probably the biggest one to me. It's not just that we talk about these things here. It's that we live them out tomorrow. And when you go to work, you live in a different way than the people who are there because of what you believe, because of who you are, because of your resilience. And then fifth, resilient disciples are countercultural by being selfless. It's not about my rights. It's not about I'm correct. It's about I am concerned about you. And when we encounter people in the world that frustrate, when we encounter Nabals in our world that are foolish and frustrate us and we don't know what to do with them, we look at them and we think, what can I do to help this person? Not what can I do to make them agree with me? What can I do to help this person? And then as we move on in that relationship, what can I do to teach this person about Jesus? What can I do to show them who Jesus is in my life and who he could be in their lives? And their lives can be changed because of your resilience. As Abigail, this person who did not wake up that morning to change everything within her world and the lives of the people around her, she did. She had no authority to do that. It doesn't seem like she should have had the resources to do that, but she did. And I believe truly that each one of us can do our little piece of that too. So tonight, as we think about resilience, I hope you will realize that as you encounter situations in life, as the people around you act foolishly and result in others strapping on swords and getting ready for a fight, you can do something to make that better most of the time. And even more than that, you can be reminded, as Abigail reminds David, that God is the one to take up this battle, and that God is the one who is with you and will help you through. Tonight, if you have never followed him, you can be changed so much more than Abigail was, so much more than anyone else in this story. You can be changed eternally, forever. You can be with him, you can be baptized into him, live forever with him in heaven. Or if you have walked away from that for any number of reasons, let the resiliency come back tonight. Be flexible, be able to move back through whatever has held you away. Come back to him tonight as we stand, as we sing.